Can y'all please come?
And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's on board.
From our friends at GMA, no, everyone was not on board. Nolan was not on board.
A body washes up on a Mississippi barrier island, face down, wearing nothing but swim trunks. 18-year-old Nolan Wells had gone to Horn Island 2 days earlier with a boat full of friends to celebrate the 4th of July. He never came back. His phone did. It returned to shore that same night, sitting on the console of a boat, while Nolan stayed behind on an island with no cell service, no shelter, and by nightfall, no way home. 2 autopsies later, investigators still cannot say how he died. They cannot say if he was conscious when he entered the water. They cannot say if anyone was with him in his final moments. What they can say is this: something happened on that stretch of sand that a search team, a grieving family, and a small army of true crime cameras are still trying to piece together. This case will show you 2 completely different versions of the same afternoon and ask you to decide which one holds up. Before we go further, a note. This case involves a real death that remains officially unresolved, and we're going to handle the details with care. If you're new here, we cover cases like this one, cases still unfolding in real time, with more questions than answers. Hit subscribe so you don't miss where this one goes next, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This is the story of Nolan Wells. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a recent high school graduate from the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and by every account from the people who knew him, one of the most well-liked people in his friend group. Friends describe him as someone who lit up a room the moment he walked into it. He was known for smiling constantly, for never speaking badly about anyone, and for being the person his friends called when they needed to laugh. One close friend, who grew up with Nolan from elementary school through their freshman year of college, described him as more than a friend. He called him a brother.
Nolan, I could describe Nolan in a million ways. I mean, Nolan was not just a best friend of me, but he was a brother. I grew up through elementary, middle school, high school, and even our freshman year of college.
Nolan came from a tight-knit group that had known each other since middle school. They spent weekdays together after school, weekends on the water, and had been going out to Horn Island together for years. The 4th of July trip wasn't a one-time event. It was tradition. Nolan had made the same trip the year before, with many of the same people. He was an athlete. Photos from before his death show him in a football uniform, and friends describe him as a star player with a promising future ahead of him. He was heading into his freshman year of college. His mother, Christine, would later describe him as a young man with a deep faith. In a statement released after his death,
deep love for the Lord and an unwavering faith that was evident in the way he lived his life. As much as our hearts are broken,
his family said he had an unwavering belief that guided how he lived his life, and that even in their grief, they found comfort, knowing where they believed he now rested. Nolan was, by all accounts, an easygoing 18-year-old spending a holiday weekend the way thousands of other people on the Mississippi Gulf Coast were spending it that day, on a boat, on an island, with friends he'd known most of his life. That's the young man at the center of this story. Now here's what happened to him. Horn Island sits about 10 to 12 miles off the coast of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a barrier island accessible only by boat, roughly 11 miles long, and completely undeveloped. No buildings, no bathrooms, no cell towers. On most days, it's close to empty. The 4th of July is not most days. According to Nolan's friends, boating and fishing culture runs deep on the Gulf Coast, and Horn Island is the single most popular 4th of July destination on the entire coast. On the day Nolan disappeared, witnesses estimate there were between 2,000 and 4,000 people on the island, spread across the water in boats stacked 2, 3, sometimes 4 rows deep, stretching for miles along the shoreline. Nolan had stayed the night before at a friend's house. The group woke up early on July 4th, prepped 3 boats, an 18-foot Palm Beach, a 22-foot Triton, and a 24-foot Tidewater, loaded them with ice, food, and drinks, and met up with roughly 20 to 30 friends at a dock before departing together for the island. They arrived around 10:30 that morning. The water was calm. According to friends who were there, the boats anchored close together near the island's west tip, the most crowded section, with the group forming one cluster among what quickly became dozens of others. For the next several hours, it was, by every description given, an ordinary beach party. People waded in waist to neck-deep water near the boats. Music played. Drinks were passed around. Nolan mixed with multiple friend groups throughout the day, not just the small circle he arrived with, but people he knew from high school, from college, and people he'd never met before. Multiple witnesses describe him as being in a good mood, laughing, having ordinary conversations with the people around him. At some point in the afternoon, Nolan was seen with a young woman identified only as Katie, someone he had reportedly just met that day. Friends say the two spent time together near the boats, and that it appeared, in the words of one friend, that Nolan genuinely liked her. By early afternoon, the day looked like thousands of other 4th of July gatherings happening up and down that same stretch of coastline. Then, sometime around 4 o'clock to 4:30 in the afternoon, the day took a turn, and everything after that point is where the story splits. Here is what multiple friends who were present say happened, and what is disputed by outside observers who were not. According to the friend who was driving the Triton, a bilge pump on the boat, the mechanism that clears water that collects inside the hull, began to fail. Water was reportedly rising toward the boat's battery and getting close to spilling over the stern near the motor. The crew described it as an emergency. They needed to get the boat back to the mainland before it took on too much water to run. Friends say they called out to Nolan, more than once, telling him to get on the boat immediately. According to their account, Nolan chose to stay behind with Katie rather than leave with the group. They say Katie later confirmed this to one of Nolan's friends in a text message, stating she witnessed the group calling for Nolan and saw him decide to stay. At approximately 4:30 p.m., a call was placed to a towing company, Sea Tow, reporting the boat was taking on water. Audio obtained by news outlets from that call includes the question, "Is everybody on board and in good health otherwise?" and a response of, Yeah, everybody's on board."
Can you all please come?
And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's on board.
Nolan was not on that boat. The boat was towed for roughly 3 miles before the tow ended, and the group made their way back toward the mainland, eventually docking, then reportedly making additional stops, including a return trip toward Fort Bayou, before the boat was finally pulled from the water hours later, sometime after 6 p.m. This sequence of stops, tows, and delays is one of the central points of dispute in this case. Critics have asked why a boat reportedly in danger of sinking was taken on multiple additional trips that evening rather than immediately removed from the water. Friends who were present say the explanation is simple. Once the bilge pump issue was addressed and the boat could plane, meaning get up on top of the water at speed, the excess water drained out on its own, and the group continued on to drop people off and retrieve a vehicle. Nolan's phone remained on the boat when it left the island. According to friends, this was not unusual behavior for that specific day. They describe a common, informal practice among the group. Phones stay on the boats while people are in the water because salt water damages electronics and because reception on the island is minimal to non-existent. Multiple friends say phones were left scattered across the boat consoles that day, not just Nolan's. Nolan's family and their legal team have pushed back strongly on this explanation, calling it out of character. Nolan's father told reporters he had always instructed his son that if you go somewhere with a group, you leave with that same group, and that Nolan had always followed that instruction, including in college. The last confirmed sighting of Nolan, according to his closest friend, was around 3 o'clock that afternoon, sitting with Katie near the boats, laughing. A separate, unverified report places a possible sighting of Nolan as late as 6:30 p.m., over 2 hours after his friends had left the island. What happened between those 2 points in time is the question this entire case still hasn't answered. By that evening, Nolan had not returned home, and he had not been in contact with anyone, a fact made more significant by friends' description of him as someone constantly active on his phone, regularly posting and messaging. Around 11 p.m. that night, one of Nolan's close friends called Nolan's mother, Christine, to ask if she'd heard from him. She had not. The friend then contacted the Coast Guard directly, providing a full description: what Nolan was wearing, the last place he was seen, who he'd been with, and conditions on the water that day. Christine Wells began making her own calls that night to state and county authorities. No one located Nolan that night. The next morning, family and friends launched their own search alongside official crews. What they found on the water was a massive coordinated response. Department of Marine Resources boats, helicopters, fixed-wing search planes, and law enforcement vessels covering not just Horn Island, but neighboring islands including Ship Island and Petit Bois. The United Cajun Navy, a volunteer search and rescue organization frequently called in for missing persons cases along the Gulf Coast, joined the search using a small aircraft to canvass the area from above. After roughly 2 hours in the air, the crew spotted law enforcement boats converging on the northwest tip of Horn Island. Circling in for a closer look, they saw officers gathered around a body on the shoreline. The body matched the description of Nolan Wells, the same swim trunks he'd been photographed wearing that day. He was found face down at the shoreline, wearing only swim trunks, no shirt, no shoes. A park ranger on the island had spotted him first, before law enforcement arrived on scene. According to the United Cajun Navy, the location where Nolan's body was recovered is an area known locally for a dangerous, circulating rip current, nicknamed the washing machine by people familiar with the coastline, where water depth shifts from a few feet to nearly 20 feet within a short distance. Search crews stated it's not uncommon for a body to wash ashore relatively close to wherever a drowning incident occurred in that specific stretch of water. Nolan Wells was found roughly 2 days after he was last confirmed seen. He was 18 years old. An initial autopsy was conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. As of the most recent public reporting, that office has not released its findings, and the sheriff's early public comment made within an hour of the body being found, describing it as an apparent accidental drowning with no signs of foul play, became one of the flashpoints that intensified public scrutiny of the case. Nolan's mother has publicly said that early characterization is part of why the family lost confidence in the initial handling of the investigation. At the family's request, Nolan's body was flown to Washington, D.C. for a second, independent autopsy performed by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell, president of the National Medical Association. The family said they wanted an examiner with no ties to Mississippi law enforcement. That report, released as a preliminary finding, listed the cause and manner of death as undetermined, pending further investigation. But it noted one specific finding that became the center of public attention. During dissection of the lower back of the head, Dr. Mitchell documented a 12 by 8 inch area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissue overlying the occipital bone, the bone at the base of the skull. Multiple forensic pathologists, independently consulted on this finding, have offered similar caveats. The discoloration was not accompanied by any laceration to the overlying skin, nor any fracture to the underlying skull, findings that would typically be expected in cases of significant blunt force trauma. Forensic experts interviewed on the case, including Dr. Kendall Crowns, Chief Medical Examiner of Tarrant County, and Dr. Priya Banerjee, a forensic pathologist with over a decade of experience, both noted that this type of discoloration has multiple possible explanations. It can result from blunt trauma, but it can equally result from lividity, the settling of blood after death, or from decompositional changes in tissue, especially in a body that had been in warm salt water for roughly 2 days before recovery. Both examiners stressed that without visible fractures or additional injury patterns, it is not possible to determine which explanation applies based on this finding alone. The second autopsy also noted a significant limitation. The anterior internal neck structures, including the hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage, and laryngeal cartilage, were not sent with the body for the second examination. These structures are the ones forensic pathologists typically examine when ruling out strangulation. Both Dr. Crowns and Dr. Banerjee explained that it is standard and common practice for a primary medical examiner to retain these structures for further internal analysis, particularly in a case still under active investigation, and that this alone is not evidence of concealment. Dr. Banerjee noted she herself would have made the same decision in a similarly high-profile case. The report also noted that due to advanced decomposition, the pathologist could not directly examine the lungs and airway for water content, nor the stomach for evidence of ingested water, key indicators typically used to support a drowning determination. Original toxicology results from the first autopsy had not been released publicly at the time the second report was issued. Forensic experts interviewed for this case emphasized that toxicology findings in a decomposed body must be interpreted carefully, since the natural bacterial process of decomposition itself produces alcohol in body tissue, meaning a positive alcohol reading alone cannot be assumed to reflect alcohol consumption before death. A separate forensic consultant, death investigator Joe Scott Morgan, offered another read on the same finding after reviewing the second autopsy's diagram of the discoloration. He noted the marked area appeared to have defined edges, what he described as visible margins rather than the random, spread-out pattern typically associated with decomposition alone. He stopped short of calling it evidence of trauma, but said the shape was distinct enough that he wanted to understand its cause. Investigators involved in the recovery have separately suggested the marking could be explained by contact with marine life, such as crabs, common in that shoreline environment after a body has been in the water for an extended period. Morgan pushed back on that explanation, noting that scavenger activity typically leaves more generalized damage across exposed areas of a body, not a single, contained mark isolated to one location. As of the most recent public information, no official cause or manner of death has been released by Mississippi authorities. However, the case has escalated. Local officials have confirmed the FBI is now involved in the investigation, and that all information related to the case is being routed through the district attorney's office. It has not been publicly stated why federal involvement was requested. Possible explanations discussed by legal analysts include resource support for a small local department handling a high-profile case, or the involvement of a civil rights component tied to the family's legal team. As of this reporting, more than 60 individuals have been interviewed by law enforcement in connection with the case. Much of the public dispute in this case has centered on Nolan's phone. When the family retrieved Nolan's phone from his friends the day after he went missing, Christine Wells has said she found no photos, videos, or Snapchat activity from July 4th, a detail she and the family's legal team describe as suspicious, particularly given friends' own description of Nolan as someone constantly active on social media. Digital forensics experts consulted on the case have explained that this observation alone cannot confirm deletion occurred. A full forensic acquisition of the device, not a visual inspection by family members, would be required to determine definitively whether content was deleted, and if so, when. Experts noted that Snapchat content in particular is designed to disappear automatically, and that a lack of cellular signal on the island, which friends confirmed was extremely limited, could independently explain a lack of uploaded content from that day, regardless of what photos may have been taken and stored locally. A second discrepancy involves two separate phone tracking applications, Snapchat's location feature and Life 360, which reportedly displayed conflicting information about the phone's last known location, one suggesting it remained near the water, the other suggesting it had returned to dry land. Family members and friends have offered different interpretations of this discrepancy, and no independent digital forensic analysis has been publicly released to resolve it. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the family, has stated publicly that both the family's forensic team and independent experts have agreed to conduct a joint inspection of the phone. Separately, an audio clip circulating on social media, reportedly recorded by a bystander on Horn Island, appears to capture a heated verbal exchange, including a voice saying, "Give me my phone," and another voice responding aggressively. Attorney Crump's team initially suggested this could be Nolan's voice. Multiple other individuals have since come forward claiming the exchange involved a separate, unrelated altercation entirely, unconnected to Nolan. As of this reporting, the audio has not been independently authenticated or attributed to any specific individual by investigators. Nolan's friends, in extended on-camera interviews conducted after the initial wave of coverage, pushed back forcefully against the broader narrative that had formed around the case. Specifically, characterizations suggesting Nolan had been isolated on a secluded island with only a handful of people. His closest friend returned to Horn Island to walk through the timeline on camera, showing footage and pointing to the density of boats and people present that day, arguing that the idea of Nolan being alone with only 3 or 4 other people is inconsistent with what he says was a crowded, witnessed public event. He stated that all of the friends present voluntarily cooperated with law enforcement from the first time investigators contacted them, and continued to do so throughout the case. The involvement of attorney Ben Crump, along with public comparisons made by some commentators to other cases involving race, has become its own subplot in the media coverage, with some commentators, including conservative commentator and former police officer Brandon Tatum, publicly arguing that race has been inserted into a situation with no established evidence connecting it to Nolan's death, and family representatives countering that the family is simply asking for a complete, transparent investigation, regardless of how that request has been characterized. The sequence of that first night has also been clarified through more recent reporting. According to Christine Wells, she received a phone call around 11 p.m. from Warren Hudson, one of Nolan's friends, informing her Nolan hadn't been heard from. She then contacted another friend's mother to ask if her sons had seen him. It was after these calls that the family began actively tracking Nolan's phone through Life 360 and Snapchat, which is where the conflicting location data first surfaced. A separate development involves an offer from the United Cajun Navy to bring in cadaver dogs to inspect the boat used that day, in response to online speculation that Nolan's body had been transported and staged. According to the organization, the offer was communicated to the family's legal team and was not accepted. No public explanation for that decision has been given. The organization has stated that a trained cadaver dog would be capable of detecting decomposition scent on a boat even after cleaning, using currently available forensic methods, meaning the offer, if accepted, could have either supported or ruled out claims that the boat had been used to move a body. As of this reporting, the boat has not been examined by cadaver dogs, and no forensic analysis of the boat has been made public. None of the friends who were on Horn Island with Nolan that day have been named as suspects or charged with any crime. As of the most recent public reporting, the case of Nolan Wells remains open, and it is growing, not shrinking. The FBI has joined the investigation. The district attorney's office is now overseeing the case directly, with legal analysts noting that a suspicious, unresolved death of this kind would typically be presented to a grand jury. No official cause or manner of death has been released. No arrests have been made. No charges have been filed against anyone. What is known, Nolan Wells went to Horn Island with a large group of friends on a day when the island was packed with thousands of people. At some point in the late afternoon, he chose to stay behind rather than leave on a boat experiencing mechanical trouble. He was last confirmed seen around 3 o'clock. He was found 2 days later, face down on the shoreline, roughly 2 miles of coastline still packed with holiday crowds around him. Everything in between, how he entered the water, whether he was alone, whether anyone saw what happened to him, remains unanswered. Nolan's family continues to push for a complete and transparent investigation. His friends continue to maintain they have nothing to hide and have fully cooperated with authorities from the beginning. Both things can be true at once. A family in unbearable grief demanding answers, and friends facing intense public accusation while insisting they did nothing wrong. This documentary hasn't tried to settle that tension because the evidence publicly available right now doesn't settle it either. What isn't in dispute is who Nolan Wells was before any of this happened. He was 18 years old. He was about to start college. He was, by every account from the people who loved him, someone who made the people around him laugh, who never had an unkind word for anyone, and who was looking forward to a future that got taken from him on a beach that was supposed to be nothing more than a holiday with friends. If you know anything about what happened to Nolan Wells, investigators are asking you to come forward. If this case affected you the way it's affected so many people following it, subscribe to Crime Vault. We follow cases like this one all the way through, however long it takes for the truth to surface. And let us know in the comments, what do you think really happened on Horn Island? Rest in peace, Nolan.